going on, everybody? It's RoyJ coming at you with a brand new video, and while I was doing some shopping for a card game that I've been wanting to try for a very long time, when I was thinking about it, I kind of noticed something interesting, that I've never talked about my card game. Now, for those that are unaware, I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For over 12 years now, I think it is, since I was like 8 years old, and that's a pretty long time, and of course, being a kid, sometimes you would wonder, if you did play card games, of course, what if I made my own card game, right? That's something that kind of crosses the mind of just about any kid that plays any sort of card game, Pokemon, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever. And I've actually gone through quite a few myself. This isn't even the very first one that I made. As you can see here, I got a pretty thick stack of cards that I've made here. The first one that I made was actually a different iteration of this game, and then the second one I made that I actually, kind of quote-unquote finished was a Gravity Falls-based card game that I played with my friend. But this is really what I have in terms of the most amount of cards and the most amount of effort that I put into making my own card game. Now this is Spellbound. Spellbound is a TCG that I made back in 6th grade by, making stuff like this, and then I would like glue it with an Elmer's glue stick to a Pokemon card, and I had those. And that was kind of the initial thing I did for that game. And this is when I ended up doing when I remade the game in 7th grade. I had an entire sketchbook, as you can see. This is basically like at least half of a sketchbook's worth of pages where I just completely dedicated it to making this card game. And my idea was I was going to make all these, ink them, color them, whatever, and then I was going to scan them and photocopy them and, try to like actually make a game out of it that you could play and that I could play with my friends. But of course, it never really ended up coming to fruition, not because I didn't want to do it or in the end, or because I forgot, but literally just because I didn't have access to a photocopier, which I thought was pretty funny. But this is a game that you can clearly see I put a lot of work into, and I was really excited, and it's definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorite card game that I've created. And I decided I wanted to talk a little bit about, the game itself. There's not too much to talk about, like, the gameplay or anything like that. It's literally just Yu-Gi-Oh!, but I reworded some things. But I wanted to show off, like, the artwork and stuff, some of the effects, how I balanced things or came up with stories and stuff back in 7th grade, because that was one of my favorite years of existence, creatively, I should say. I was super artistic. I was doing a lot of card game stuff. I was doing a lot of, like, manga stuff. I was doing a lot of stuff. That was a really big year for me. But yeah, I don't want to waste any more time here. Let's go ahead and start talking about the game. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. The lighting might get a little bit darker. But the game evolved, kind of like Yu-Gi-Oh! In a sense, around 6 elements or types or attributes, whatever you really want to call them. And those elements were Terra, which is basically like Earth, but you can also kind of use it for life and stuff like that. Gale, which is basically wind. Pyro, which is fire. Necromancy, which is kind of like dark, death, all sorts of stuff like that. Aqua, which is water. And then my personal favorite was Ether, because this one was actually pretty unique. This could be many things. It's like space, cosmic stuff, light, any sort of thing you really want there. It really was a stand-in for kind of just anything in that sort of nature, essence, stuff like that. It was a lot of really cool stuff you could do with Ether. So a basic synopsis of like, the story or lore, I guess you could call it, is that all 6 of these maguses here, they're vanilla monsters, though it was really hard to actually tell because there was like no difference in the cards. They kind of just kept a planet in harmony, right? They balanced the elements and stuff. They kind of kept everything, fine. But then the Ether Magus turned out to like become evil. He wanted more power or whatever, tried to overthrow the kingdom, destroy the planet, yada yada, take over. And so typically the Ether stuff, you'll see a lot of like, bad guy stuff. But basically, these are kind of like the element holders or whatever, though because they're vanilla, they don't actually really even matter. They just have high stats for level 4s, or rank 4s as I called them, which was still copying Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they also have ranks. But let's go ahead and start covering some of these. So the Terra Magus is the first one, which I think I kind of based the appearance on one of my friends at the time. She is a headstrong but caring mage that protects the land and forests. She goes to unimaginable lengths to protect those close to her. They all have their own like little flavor text here describing them because they were basically normal monsters or creatures in this game. But all of them have 2,000 power and 1,500 armor. just because they're like, again, I think these are like promos, I'm pretty sure they were supposed to be, and so they had high stats. Then you have the Gale Mages, whose artwork I really like, and I liked it even more when I actually remade the card game. This is not the first, nor by far, nor is it the last of the iterations of this game. And every time I remade her artwork, it was really, really good. But she is a serene and calm mage who despises war and violence. During war, she'd rather tend to the wounded rather than fight, which is ironic considering she still has 2,000 power like the rest of them. Then you have the Pyromagus, whose artwork I always despised as a kid because, the perspective was just so bad. But he is a hot-headed mage who works as a blacksmith, and he has a very short temper because stereotypical fire-based character, I guess. You have the Necromancy Mage. It's one of my favorites, honestly. He's kind of got this really cool background and stuff, and he's got that Dr. Facilier skull mask going for him. I really love this guy. He is a dark mage that watches over the spirits, and he's a loner and enjoys tea, because, he's super scary and evil, but he's actually a pretty chill dude. Then you have the Aqua Magus, always loved her art as well. She is a peaceful and happy mage who spends her time in the sea, and she refuses to eat sushi, because she got that Fisher Friends not food ideology going on. And then finally, you got the big, scary Ether Magus, who he's got like this mask and glowing eyes, and he was supposed to look intimidating, but he honestly kind of looks like a dork. But he's a powerful mage that rules over the stars. However, there is a great evil in his heart. Ooh, foreshadowing. But yeah, they kind of were supposed to be promo cards. I guess you were kind of given one whenever you started the game based on what element you kind of wanted to go after, which is pretty cool in theory, though I never actually got around to it, of course. And then while they were technically, I think these were also promos, while they were technically linked to the mages, they didn't really actually specify them or anything, but each mage had their own familiar. Starting with Familiar Soul, all of them basically have the ability, by the way, if you control a creature of their element, you get to special spawn them from your hand, which is just special summon in Yu-Gi-Oh terms. Not a once per turn or anything like that, no limit to that. So they're actually pretty decent. They usually have pretty good stats too, 1800 by 1000. But the Familiar Soul right here, little spirit kind of guy. If you control a necromancy creature, you can special spawn it from your hand. All of them have the same effect, so I'm not really going to linger too much on that. You have Familiar Guppy, which I always thought was weird. I think I probably should have put a fin on the top or something to actually make it a little bit better. And then you have Familiar Drake, which shockingly is not beefing with Familiar Kendrick. But I had this really weird, but this looks horrible, by the way. I mean, obviously it's fairly impressive for my mediocre art skills at the time. But God, I just can't get over the stupid head. But yeah, for like the scale tactic I had at that age was, instead of like drawing every individual scale, I would kind of just chicken scratch it all, kind of like scribble really roughly, and kind of go over the lines and stuff over and over. And that would create like a rough textured effect, which it looked a lot better back and then, but like, obviously the pencils kind of worn off over the years. Like this was, God, this is how many years ago? 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. I've been out for 2 years. So like almost 8 years now, which is kind of insane. So yeah, the pencil's definitely worn off by now. And these were, like I said, they were kind of supposed to be promos along with the Maguses. They're from some set with the acronym of AOCB, which I think this is one of the only ones where you wouldn't even be able to like put a gun to my head for me to remember what they stood for. I have no clue what AOCB. I think it was something of creation something. I have no clue. But yeah, those are the first 3 familiars, and then we have some more on the next page, being Familiar Treant here. I actually really like this guy's artwork. I thought he was pretty cool. He's like this little stump dude with log hands. Then you have Familiar Hawk, which was definitely one of like the bigger ones, obviously, in terms of artwork. And then Familiar Firefly, which, don't quote me on this, but this might have been directly inspired from the Fire from Above spell in Wizard 101, because I think that was like after the first time I actually saw that card in game, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. But that is it for like the promos and stuff. Moving on to like the first set, this was Elemental Balance, which is like a pretty standard name for something like this. But they actually had some pretty cool cards in it. And it's basically kind of showcased sort of the overall theme for each of the kind of elements. And some of these kind of had evolution lines, quote unquote. Some of them were like direct evolution sort of things. Some of them were like kind of vague, but they were supposed to go into certain things. And then others like just straight up started archetypes. Like you can see the Cloudpuff archetype here, which is straight up ripped from Cloudians in Yu-Gi-Oh! As well as the Sulfur archetype, which wasn't supposed to be anything big at first. It was just supposed to revolve around this Sulfur block kind of guy. This actually ended up becoming basically like the standard archetype for the Ether element, which is pretty funny of all things. I don't know why I went with Sulfur. But starting off, we have Skull Spirit, little skull head dude, really cute. He gains 100 power for every other necromancy creature on the field, starting with 1,000 power, and this works for both fields as well, so if you're playing in the necromancy mirror match, that could be pretty cool. You can get him pretty beefy. Then you got Shark Bit, one of my favorites in the entire game. I love the look of this little dude. It is a vanilla. It says a creation by the Aqua Magus that eventually escaped, now free in the open ocean. Ooh, spooky. And then the Sulfur Block. Again, this is kind of like what the Sulfur archetype was supposed to revolve around, and then it kind of just ended up becoming a much bigger thing. But it literally just only says all Ether creatures gain 500 armor. That stacks on him as well, so he goes from 500 armor to 1,000, and then the rest of your Ether creatures will get pretty beefy. You had some that could attack pretty decently, but it was usually like a pretty stall-y kind of deck for a little while until you eventually started getting more attackers. You could get some pretty big armor values, by the way, and power and armor basically are just attack and defense. Again, this is literally just almost a carbon copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! At the time, just with the words changed around. It was pretty crazy. And then moving to the other elements, we have Cub Tree here. Weird little bear dude. I have no clue why he looks like that. But it can attack twice per turn, which is pretty neat. That's really all it does. Then you have Cloudpuff Cirrus here, which, again, these are basically kind of just ripped from Cloudians. But I actually really liked this artwork for the longest time. I love like the little wispy effects. A lot of the Cloudpuff artworks are actually some of my favorites. This is one of my favorite archetypes in the game by far. But it just straight up says once per turn it cannot be destroyed. I think the Cloudians say that as well, like once per turn they cannot be destroyed by battle, or just straight up they can't be destroyed by battle. So I think I ripped that from there. You could tell this was right after Rata like released the Cloudian archetype archive, or Legacy of the Worthless. Well, I think it was an archetype archive, yeah. Yeah, I remember watching that when I was a lot younger, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'm going to make my own sort of thing. And for the Pyro one, you can definitely tell this is when I was in my big Clash Royale phase, because this is just Fire Spirits. This is just straight ripped Fire Spirits, which is really funny, which is pretty cool, because that was one of my favorite cards in the game at the time, and it's a pretty decent artwork here with like the background and everything. And there's a vanilla too. It says mysterious bits of flaming charcoal left over from a furnace. So moving to the next page, we actually have the first, I don't remember exactly what they were called, but they're basically just rip-off spell cards. I don't think I actually had traps in the game. I think that's something I wanted to distinguish, so you kind of just use quick plays in that aspect. But you have Bubble Build to start us off. You got Shark Bit here, kind of being tinkered with. He's supposed to have chunks missing. I think that's what those dark patches are supposed to be, but it definitely did not make sense at all. But it tributes an aqua creature to spawn a Chompbot from your hand or deck, and we'll get to Chompbot. He's at the very top of the page. But basically, it's like the stage 2 in the line. And then you have Skull Recruit, which, come to think about it, this was basically go do a crime before that meme was even a thing, and I think that's pretty funny. He was giving the little dude a fucking sword. But it tributes a Skull Spirit to special spawn, or summon, basically, a Skeleton Soldier from your hand or deck. This one is more of like a direct spirit into Soldier. Some of them are more direct, some of them are more generic. It really just depends. Then you have Sulfur Smog. This one actually breaks the mold a little bit. It's just a straight up Sulfur support card as opposed to like a rank up. It destroys a Sulfur block you control to destroy a card on the field. I know it's very hard to read. I chose like the worst shade of purple to shade in the effect boxes. And then you have Den Rest. This tributes a rank 3 Terra creature to special spawn a Bear Leaf from your hand or deck. You got Puff Up. You got Cirrus here trying to get bigger. It tributes a Cloudpuff creature to spawn a Cloudpuff Nimbus from your hand or deck. And then you have Magma Armory, which is just a bunch of really cool stuff that the Pyro Magus is supposed to have forged. You know, you got hammer, sword, fucking grenades, I guess. You tribute a Charcoal Chunklets to spawn a Magma minion from your hand or deck. At the very top of the page, you start to see some of the quote-unquote evolved versions here. You got Chompbot, whose artwork I always really loved back then. So even now, it's not that bad. He kind of got this really dynamic pose. He's kind of like doing almost like an Akira bike slide in the water. And then he's got like, it's like a little bit of smudge shading over here. It's supposed to be like the water moving or whatever. He's making like a whiplash or something. And it can only be spawned with Bubble Build, but it deals crushing damage, which is basically piercing. 2300 power, not bad, so you can deal some pretty decent damage with this guy. Next up, we got Skeleton Soldier. I don't remember if I made this one or if my friend did. I think I made this exact one, and my friend made a different version of it, like maybe an older version of the game. But it can attack up to the number of necromancy creatures you control, and with 2100 power, if you can get a lot of necromancy creatures on board, that can deal a lot of damage. And then finally, you have Sulfur Beetle on this page. This isn't like an upgrade or anything. Like I said, the Sulfur archetype was kind of like its own thing in the beginning, and then everything else kind of got regular archetypes in the end. And I was so proud of this wall shading for the longest time, even though it makes literally no sense unless there was weird lighting in there. But it's like a little beetle on I think it's supposed to be a conveyor belt picking up pieces of a sulfur block that was destroyed. And when it spawned, you can special spawn a sulfur block from your deck. So you can get a free block from your deck, which is really cool because that's just an extra body. But when we get to the next page, you'll see that this card kind of just pales in comparison to the upgraded version, quote unquote. It doesn't evolve or anything. There's just straight up a better card that there's no reason to put this on board instead of that card. But speaking of, moving on to the next page here, you got a Bear Leaf down in the corner. This is the evolved form of the Cub Tree, I think its name was. It's got these little like stick arms or whatever, which is pretty cool. And if it destroys a creature, you can, or by combat specifically, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to half of that creature's power. So you can deal a decent amount of damage there. You got Cloudpuff Nimbus, whose artwork, I still really like this artwork, honestly. Like I said, a lot of the Cloudpuff artworks I'm just so proud of at the time, and even now. Like some pretty dynamic shading. He's got a pretty cool looking body here. It says once per turn, it cannot be destroyed. That's kind of like a common theme amongst almost if not all the Cloudpuffs. It gains 200 power for each Gale creature in your cemetery, which is not great, especially in the early game, because while he does have some pretty good protection and some like armor, you know, he has 0 power, if you can see it here. So he can literally only go up by like maybe up to 1,000 in like the mid game, especially with the Cloudpuffs protecting themselves. So they're not always going to be in the cemetery. And yeah, it was a pretty low number. I should have given him at least some starting power to start off with. But so you're basically going to be sitting on Cirrus for a little while until you can build up some stuff in your cemetery. Then you have Magma Minion, and it can attack twice, which is pretty simple, not gonna lie. Moving on, we have the Sulfur Machine. I'll talk about that before we go into more of these spell cards. Sulfur Machine is kind of the card that just power creeps Sulfur Beetle immediately, because it has 2,000 armor, which plus the Sulfur Block, by the way, puts it to 2,500. So literally none of these cards can contest it so far if it has the block. And once per turn, you can spawn a Sulfur Block from your deck, and if you control another Ether creature, it cannot be destroyed. So this is quite literally almost an unkillable, well, machine, as it's in the name. This is definitely really annoying. I don't know why I made it so strong. I do like the artwork, though. I tried doing that shading effect on the back, by the way. It looks kind of horrible now because the pencil's faded so much. But I love the machine itself. I got all these little doohickeys and levers and everything on it. And it's basically supposed to be the thing that, like, spawns the blocks. And the effect makes sense for that. But, wow, combined with the stats and the double effects, this is really, really cracked. And then next we have Skull Crown. This is the second in the rank up line. It'll go up into the final stage, quote unquote. It treats a rank 5 or higher necromancy creature to spawn a Skull King from your deck or hand, which is the final form. Like I said with the other ones, some of them are kind of generic or vague. Some of them are like just straight up upgrade this guy into that guy. Speaking of, we have Aquatic Engineering. You got this this big sealed metal door with it's being banged on. That's what that's supposed to be. And you tribute a Chompot to special spawn a Ferothjaw from your hand or deck, and it's very specific there, but the upside is that you can immediately destroy another card on the field, which is really cool. So you get a free pop, and you get to upgrade into Ferothjaw, which is a pretty decent card once we get to him. And then we have Hibernation up here at the top. You tribute a Terra creature to special spawn a rank 8 Terra creature from your deck, probably the most generic one. I think it's because I thought I was going to make Terra kind of underpowered, but Pyro ended up easily being the most underpowered in this first set. Then you have Thunderstorm here. You got this, I think it's supposed to be Nimbus, or maybe it might be Cirrus or something, but they're definitely causing some havoc here with that rain. You got tribute a Cloudpuff creature as its effect to special spawn a Cloudpuff Cumulonimbus from your deck or hand. So you can go straight from Cirrus into the big guy, which you might not want to do yet. You might want to wait to put some more stuff in the cemetery once you see him. Then you have Magma Career, and this one's a little special because you can actually choose one of 2 effects. You tribute a rank 4 or lower Pyro creature to either spawn a Magma Peasant from your deck, or add any Pyro creature from your deck to your hand. So I'm going to tell you right now, Magma Peasant sucks. That card is absolute balls. So more often than not, you'd probably be using this to add a pyro creature from your deck to your hand. Maybe you play one peasant to kind of like have that as an option. But especially once we get into like much later sets, like this is a really thick stack of papers. Once you get into later sets, this card will probably be a really good staple at max copies to just get access to your really good pyro creatures, because I think pyro gets a lot better later on to my memory. Though I think the most broken ones ended up being like Ether, Necromancy, and maybe Gale. I think some of the Cloud Puff cards were kind of just nuts towards the end. Yeah, Magma Career is a pretty good card for a pretty underwhelming element in the very beginning. And for the final page of this set, Elemental Balance, we have, starting off with probably my favorite of the cards from the original set, that being Frothjaw. I want to zoom in a little bit more on Frothjaw here, because this guy is just so cool. I know the focus isn't like fully on, but he's got this big metal head with massive chomping jaws. He's got the glowing red eye. I did some smudge shading to make it look like it's deep, dark underwater. He's got the big metal head, but he's also got gills and stuff, and then his body is supposed to like go off frame and then come back to show just how big it is. He's got the beat up fin with like the chain hanging off of it. Someone tried to like restrain him, but he broke free. And this poor little minnow down here, which we'll actually get to. It's actually a card on this page. But this poor little minnow is about to just get absolutely devoured. And Frothjaw is actually a pretty decent card too. It can only be spawned by the Aquatic Engineering, but it does crushing damage and it does double damage. So with 3,000 power, you can end up doing quite a bit of damage with this guy. Though it is pretty specific, though, you do have to tribute Chompbot with the Aquatic Engineering to get the Frothjaw out, and the Chompbot can only be spawned off of the Bubble build, so very specific, but you do get that extra pop off Aquatic Engineering, and this guy's pretty hard to out once he actually hits the board, unless they have a quote-unquote spell card. I'm going to call them ability cards, unless they have an ability card to get rid of him. Then you have Skull King here, which is pretty cool. He's not King of the Skull Servants, funnily enough. But it can attack 3 times, which, funnily enough, is actually way less than what the previous guy could maximum. But if it destroys a creature by combat, you get to draw a card, and you can tell I forgot to add this part at the beginning, but it can only be spawned with the Skull Crown. Not a bad card. Getting that extra draw power is pretty cool. Attacking 3 times by default with 2,800 power is also pretty good. You can get rid of like a really big setup there. Really good into Sulfur specifically. Anything that can attack multiple times with big stats is pretty good into Sulfur. Speaking of Sulfur, you have Sulfur Paladin, which again, horrible choice of color coding for the effect. But it says other ether creatures gain 500 power, and if it destroys a creature by combat, you can add 1 Sulfur card from your deck to your hand. So he kind of just came out of nowhere, I'm not gonna lie. He's not really like a creature or a block or even like a factory worker. He's just a big dude with a sword. He was kind of random. But this is actually kind of an insane card, not gonna lie. So he has no inherent summon or anything like that, nothing that like specifically brings him out. But if you can bring him out, he's a 2,800 beat stick that makes all of your other things bigger beat sticks, and can add any Sulfur card from your deck to your hand when he destroys something, which he probably will with his stats. Also, speaking of stats, he has 2,500 armor, which goes to 3,000 with the Sulfur block randomly. But yeah, this card gets a lot stronger later on because, again, Sulfur became kind of like the main overarching archetype for the Ether elements. So Sulfur Paladin's kind of just broken once you can actually get him out reliably. Then next up we have Ursa Stump, which is the final form of Cub Tree. It's just I don't know why I was obsessed with giving so many Terra creatures just big log hands, but this one was actually pretty funny. And it can only be spawned with Hibernation, but it's basically just an upgraded Bear Leaf because it does the full damage when it destroys a creature by combat. So basically every time you kill a creature by combat, when it's in attacking mode, you actually get to basically just deal 3k to it for free. But also it can attack twice, which is pretty cool. So you can do up to 6,000 damage if you attack 2 things, which is pretty awesome. And then we have Cloudpuff Cumulonimbus here. Always loved this guy's artwork too, because like the perspective and stuff. He's got this big hand out here, but then he's also got this one that's kind of like closer or whatever in the frame. Then he's got like the lightning coming down. He's got the swirly gale eyes, but like he's got the dark background and everything. It's so goofy, but I love it. It says once per turn, all Gale cards you control cannot be destroyed. He gains 500 power for each Gale card in your cemetery, and it can only be spawned with Thunderstorm. Now, this card might seem a bit, kind of whatever at first, just decent protection for all your stuff, but keep in mind that the ability cards as well also have assigned elements. So that means things like basically the equivalent of a field spell in this game would also be protected, or any sort of like continuous, which I think they were called infinite abilities in this game. So any infinites would also be protected. And also that goes the same with the power boost. So if you play any ability cards to get into him, you already basically have 2 free gains here, so he goes straight up to 1,000 power, not to mention the stuff you already tributed as well, so he kind of goes to 2,000 right off the bat if you use the standard line to go into him, with 2,500 armor and massive protection. The Cloudpuff archetype ended up kind of just becoming insane after a while, which was crazy, and I think that the restriction didn't even matter in the end, because I loved this archetype so much, I kind of just straight up gave them a way to cheat him out, I think, or maybe like a better version or something. It was crazy. And then, oh my god, dude, poor Pyro. This poor element sucked so bad in the beginning. You got Magma Peasant, who can attack twice. He is, I think, a whopping 300 power points stronger than the Magma Minion, with the same effect and literally nothing else. And he's not even the same level as all the other boss monsters. I don't know why I felt Pyro deserved to be completely dunked on, but yeah, it was really bad for poor Pyro players, I guess you could say, even though literally nobody even played this game, not even me. Yeah, this would have been really, really bad to start off with. But with that out of the way, I don't want to spoil too much actually from the top page. I was going to at first, but this video has kind of gone on a little long enough. But I don't want to spoil anything for the next set, because that's going to do it for this video. Going over, like the promos, a little bit of the lore and everything, and like the first set. Again, I'm surprised I never actually talked about this. It was something that was so important to me as a kid, and even now, I mean, I still try to make this card game or a different card game kind of frequently. Like, I do this a lot. It's always been one of my passions to kind of have my own card game, being such a big card game enthusiast. And I've been looking at a lot of Chaos Galaxy TCG stuff, where I'm probably going to try to get my friend to try the game, and we're going to play it together a little bit now that we can actually, access the stuff when we're not kids. And then, I don't know, I've been thinking about maybe dipping my toes back into this. Let me know in the comments below, would you be interested in seeing a retrain of this card game? I'll take it a little bit more seriously, stuff like that, actually make a good layout, and, not hand draw everything once and then pray that it works. Also, like I said, we got a really big stack of papers here. Like I said, this is probably half a sketchbook alone right here, full of stuff. So I don't want to put it all into one video because it would be way too long. Same with a stream or anything like that. I don't want to stream it or anything. So let's kind of lowball it, I guess. If this video can hit 50 likes, I will make a part 2 and show off the next set, maybe the next 2 sets, depending on how big they are. And show off a lot more of this game, because it should be a lot faster in the next videos, because I don't have to do all the exposition dump on the lore or anything like that. But I really did love making this game when I was a kid, and there's so much more amazing stuff to come if you do start seeing more, like if you do hit the like goal. There's a lot of really cool stuff, including probably one of my favorite archetypes I've made for any game that I tried making for custom cards for Yu-Gi-Oh! And I make this archetype every single time that I end up making this game or any sort of card game. It's just so cool. So be sure to hit that like goal. But with all of that out of the way, that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as helps put this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended. And if this content was like it, again, like the rest of the custom TCG, if I do get around to it, then perhaps consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free, and we're trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. Also, you want to support me directly while getting some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio cards and link down below, use code AURORA5 for 5% off your purchase at checkout, and support me financially. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.